while he was running for president, he talked about some of these things that were just so explosive. The Federal Reserve is manipulating the stock market by keeping interest rates low to make Obama look good. I mean, talk about hitting the nail on the head. That's exactly what was happening. So Trump clearly has an understanding of this. To suggest he doesn't, then how do you explain what he was saying in 2016 when he was running for president?
Hello there, my friends. Chris Marcus here with you for Arcadia Economics. And today, fortunately, as the year rounds out and we get ready for what should be a complete year of insanity in the election year of 2020, really grateful to be joined by a good friend and a guest that we had on last year, Alex Newman, foreign correspondent for the New American Magazine, who studies a lot of what happens behind the scenes with these governments and Bilderberger meetings and UN, whatever they're doing. So before we get started, hit that subscribe button so you can stay posted for this stuff that you're not going to find on CNN or elsewhere. And with that said, Alex, sure is a pleasure to catch up with you again. And how's everything going with you today?
Fantastic. Thank you very much for having me, Chris. It's always great to be with you.
Well, it's a darn pleasure for me, and I think the people watching, because, a lot of us, we've grown up with CNN, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal. Then years later, we realize things aren't quite as they seem, and perhaps never more than these days with Donald Trump's Twitter feed dominating the political and financial world. So to get started, I guess the big story these days is that the Democrats want to impeach Trump, and perhaps you could summarize that for everybody else who just gets inundated with these headlines and wants to know what's actually going on.
Yeah, I think the reason that they want to get rid of Trump and at least, cause perpetual scandal around him and demoralize him and his supporters is because even though, unfortunately, he has been advancing some of the objectives of the establishment. I think the USMCA is a very good example of that. This managed international trade with international bureaucracies and international kangaroo courts. I mean, that is what the deep state, what the establishment just loves. And actually, they've outlined on numerous occasions that that's their strategy for developing this global system that they want. But all that said, Trump really has been a thorn in the side of the establishment, even since before he became president. On the campaign trail, he was talking about that the man-made global warming hypothesis is a hoax to benefit the communist Chinese. And the media all freaked out and, how can he say that? And I just flew back from Madrid a couple of days ago. I was at the UN's climate summit. And all of them had these long faces because they know that as long as Trump's in the White House, they're not going to be able to extort the amount of money that they want from us. They're not going to be able to shackle us to this ridiculous UN climate regime. And so they're really mad about that. This is kind of central to their agenda. We want to be able to tax the gas you exhale. We want to convince your children that the gas you exhale is a toxic pollution. And as long as you have this nutty American president running around saying it's a hoax to benefit the communist Chinese, we're not going to be able to make any progress. So it's things like that, the interjecting of the term globalism into the American consciousness. Globalism is a dangerous ideology, and it's been around for a long time, and nobody has been willing to seriously confront it from a position of authority. And now you have President Trump up there saying we're going to defeat the globalists, we're going to be patriotic Americans, the UN is not going to tell us what to do. So all these different, not even to mention exposing some of this corruption. I think that's why they really want to get rid of him, and of course they want to distract from all the other things that they're involved in, the scandals, the Ukrainian corruption, the massive theft that's been going on for so long, and having an impeachment circus while they do all this certainly helps keep people distracted, divided, and dumb.
Yeah, it certainly is fascinating, and I guess my next question is just about the same exact one I asked you last year. Curious, any updated thoughts where, especially for folks a lot of the folks watching the show are in the gold and silver community. So heard Trump talk about how the stock market was a bubble when he was campaigning. We've heard a lot of folks say he's in there busting up the deep state and he's just managing things. Yet now we have the stock market hitting new all-time highs by the day, and he's saying the exact opposite, where he wants lower interest rates, negative interest rates, QE. So I think, myself included, there are a lot of people who are confused. Does he realize that it's a bubble? Is he saying what he truly feels here, or anything you could shed some light on for confused folks like myself on that one?
It's a really good question because you know as well as well as anybody that while he was running for president, he talked about some of these things that were just so explosive. The Federal Reserve is manipulating the stock market by keeping interest rates low to make Obama look good. I mean, talk about hitting the nail on the head. That's exactly what was happening. And it was still the ongoing attempt to kick the can down the road from the 2007-2008 fiasco. And so Trump clearly has an understanding of this. To suggest he doesn't, then how do you explain what he was saying in 2016 when he was running for president? He clearly knows this. And so what explains the current rhetoric? I'm frankly very concerned about it because what it does, I think, is sets him up as the fall guy if and when this whole enormous bubble, not just in the stock market, but in everything. I mean, these maniacs at the Federal Reserve are pumping hundreds of billions of dollars into the banking sector, into the economy. We now have an everything bubble. I've heard it called on multiple occasions. And at some point, this is not going to continue. It's not sustainable. It's ludicrous. It defies reality. And at best, all they're doing is kicking the can down the road some more. And so, it could be that Trump is just hopefully trying to get to the next election, try to get through the 2020 election, and then he can get serious about these things. But it's really hard to know, from an outside perspective. On the one hand, you see all these positive and encouraging signs. Trump is taking on, defunding, getting us out of all these UN agencies and agreements. He's taking seriously communist China, which, the globalists have been responsible for building up now for many, many years deliberately. He's at least trying to do something about the border crisis, just completely wide open. On the one hand, we're fighting a terror war. On the other, the border's wide open. Nobody's doing anything. So on the one hand, he's doing these good things. He's calling out globalists and the swamp and the deep state, and all that is good because we need the American people to be thinking about these things. But then on the other, what in the world's going on? Why aren't you still talking about the Federal Reserve manipulating the economy? Why aren't we addressing these serious economic problems that are structural, that are now baked into the cake, that are going to eventually result in a cataclysm? Why aren't we talking about that? Or do you think the American people are too stupid to understand it? And I think it's something that he needs to be talking about. And as best as I can figure, maybe he's just trying to, hopefully hold everything together until we can get on the other side of the 2020 election. But, this is a serious issue. It's not going to go away. And pretending that everything is fine and using Twitter to make everybody think that the economy is doing great, you can only manipulate reality for so long before actual reality sets in and bites you in the butt. And that day is coming. We need to be aware of that.
Yeah, some great points you have there, Alex, because something I wonder about a lot where, hey, if it turns out he's working this sophisticated chess match and we're all freed by the time he's out of there, then, hey, I guess, in the end, we'd be better off. Yet, to the degree that at some point, can we have a president that actually tells us the truth? Because I feel it leaves a lot of people in that position where it's like, well, maybe that's what he's doing, but we're counting on a politician, which I think a lot of us feel any politician's hard to take, especially when you see the conflicts in the statements. And perhaps here's one possible explanation, not necessarily the right one, although would love to get your comment. Because I remember maybe back earlier this year where he started talking about the Federal Reserve should be lowering interest rates so we can get the stock market going. And then shortly after that, we hadn't heard anything about the trade wars for a while. And then it was like a couple of days after that where there's trade wars and you see every time there's a headline, market sinks. I've felt this, and I've talked with a couple others who maybe felt the same thing. Is it possible that Trump has been compromised somewhere along the way, that maybe when he was campaigning, he was saying what he really feels, and now is someone holding a gun to his head and saying, you go out and say this, or we have we hear there's connections with Jeffrey Epstein. I don't know what's fact or not, but could it be a situation like that and maybe something changed along the lines?
It absolutely could, Chris. And it's total speculation on my part. I don't have any proof or even any evidence of this. But once you have an understanding of how the political system in the United States works, you realize that that is how a lot of things actually operate in Washington, D.C. And you can think of all kinds of hypothetical scenarios. We know, for example, that the intelligence agencies have been spying on pretty much everybody. We know now that they were spying on the Trump campaign. What did they find? We know they were spying on members of the courts. We know they were spying on members of Congress. I mean, they even spy on their own people, right? Dianne Feinstein in, what was it, 2014, said the CIA had hacked into her committee's computers and deleted a bunch of the evidence they were using in their investigation into the CIA's torture. So, for people who suggest, oh, they would never do that, oh, you just have no idea what you're talking about. They do that all the time. And, conceivably they could be blackmailing him. You're right. He had some of these connections to Epstein, and from what I understand from my discussions with people, he actually wasn't involved in the really nasty stuff, some of the stuff that Bill Clinton was involved in. But you never know what they might be holding over his head. Or there's always, I talked to Roger Stone a few years ago before he was put in prison. And he just said it flat out. He said the deep state wants to destroy this president. They'll try the Russia collusion. If that doesn't work, the Mueller investigation, if that doesn't work, they'll try to call him crazy. And shortly after that is when they started saying Trump is actually crazy. We got to remove him under the 25th Amendment. And then after that, Roger Stone said if those things don't work, they'll just put a bullet in his head. And so you could imagine how somebody might come up to him and say, hey, Mr. President, let's just be real with you here. We've done it before. We'll do it again. You can talk however you want. You can, say the things that rile up your base. But realistically, if you cross this line, there will be serious consequences. Then maybe you show a video of JFK getting his head blown off. And hey, you wouldn't want that to happen to you or your children, right? And so you cooperate on these important issues. You push the USMCA for us. You don't talk anymore about the Federal Reserve. That's our sacred cow. I don't want to hear another word about it, right? And I think that's entirely within the realm of possibility. And anybody who denies that, I think, is extremely naive about the way the world really works.
Yeah, it's unfortunate even when to hear you say that conceivably, maybe show a video of JFK. And although, like you also point out from the realistic side, we see that a lot of backdoor deals are cut and got. It sure would be fascinating to know what's going on behind the scenes that we aren't told, because God only knows. But Alex, I think something that'd be fun for a lot of people, given your background, would you care to share a preview of what you expect to see in this next year of election campaigning, whether that includes a winner or not, but just any of the fireworks that people probably aren't aware of that you see coming forward?
Yeah, I think the big thing to watch for 2020, Chris, is going to be election fraud. I think the Democrats were using election fraud on a massive scale in 2016, but it wasn't massive enough. And they didn't realize that until it was too late. They were totally ready for a Hillary victory. They had already printed the fake news magazines, Madam President. They ended up having to, eat that. But I think this time they learned from their mistakes. They say, all right, we've got multiple states here where there's absolutely no chance any of us will ever be prosecuted for this. California, Illinois, New York, I'm looking at you. We've got a lot of delegates. We will just absolutely pack those ballot boxes. And, I think they're even getting away with it in some of the Republican states now. George Soros has been putting a lot of money behind the people that would be involved in these kinds of things, state attorneys races, sheriff races, Secretary of State races. These are the people in many states who actually certify that the elections were legitimate. There's a reason people like George Soros from the deep state are targeting these kinds of elections, because they know that will facilitate the continuance, the perpetuation of the massive voter fraud. There's a reason that the Democrats are so obsessed with ensuring that there's no voter ID. I mean, you can go to any sane country in the world, and I've lived in 8 countries. I've been to dozens and dozens just in the last few years. every sane country in the world, including the most liberal countries. I mean, the idea that you could vote in Sweden without an ID is ludicrous. And Sweden is, the liberal utopia. It's only in America where the Democrats insist, no, it's racist to have a voter ID because we think black people are incompetent and can't get themselves an ID. I mean, I think that argument is in itself completely racist. And yet it's the argument that they use. The reason why is, if you have to use IDs, you can't have dead people voting. You can't have fake votes for people in old people's homes. You can't have fake votes for illegal immigrants. And so I think we're going to see massive voter fraud in the next election. And I think if the Trump administration and if the Republicans in power at the state level across the country don't deal with this, we may never see another fair election in our lifetimes. They'll take power. They'll legalize all the illegal immigrants. They've already done the numbers. They know that that'll be 8 million more Democrat votes. You'll never win another national election if you're conservative or Republican. And I think that's going to be the big thing to watch. I think also there's a risk that it could be nasty and violent. I think there's a very orchestrated, very deliberate, and a conscious effort to whip Americans up into a frenzy of hatred and hysteria. We've seen talk now of having UN forces come into the United States to keep the peace. We had one politician in Chicago actually said he actually went to the UN headquarters and begged them to please send UN peacekeeping troops to stop Americans from shooting each other. So it's a very real risk that things could get out of hand, violence-wise, internationally, vote fraud, and I think those are going to be the big things to watch. Who may win in the next election? I think if we can get the vote fraud under control, absent any major changes, I think Trump will win in a landslide, like he did in 2016. Not because necessarily Trump is amazing, but because normal Americans see Nancy Pelosi and they're horrified. Like, what in the world kind of crazy talk is that? But, I think vote fraud is going to be their key to success.
Yeah, and it's interesting because we hear about the CIA rigging elections around the world, and one day it hit me, if they do it there, wouldn't they do it here too? And who knows, maybe there's a pizza box behind some of these voting machines. Are they even connected? Who knows? Although, and hopefully it doesn't turn violent. So we'll pray for the best on that. Although, again, that's why I appreciate not just what you do, but also your demeanor in explaining these things, because they are important topics, yet we don't have to go to that fear place. And last thing I wanted to get into, because, there is all the negative stuff out there, yet I really admire what you've been doing with your homeschooling tour, where just teaching people and children at a young age different things and what they're indoctrinated with these public schools. And so you're not out there complaining about this stuff, but actually making an impact. So perhaps you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chris. So we put together a special report in the New American Magazine, came out early this year, early 2019, called Rescuing Our Children. And I followed that up with a nationwide speaking tour. It's still ongoing. I actually loaded up my family for 4 months with a trailer. We toured the entire country, did, I think, 60-something stops in 30-something states. We've done many more since then. I've since dropped off my family, and now I'm just flying all over the place to do these. But, the real objective is to get Americans to come to their senses and pull their children out of the government's indoctrination centers. We really should stop even calling these things schools. They're not schools. They are weaponized institutions that are turning your children into little brainwashed zombies who are ready to turn against you, turn against your church, turn against your freedom, turn against this country. And it's happening on an industrial scale. They've now become very, very effective. And so what we're doing is, first of all, showing parents what's going on there, because the great majority of American parents have absolutely no idea how bad it's gotten. They know it's bad. They know that things have gotten pretty crazy since when they were children, but they don't realize how bad it is. So that's step one, raise awareness. And then step two, rather than moaning about it and complaining and starting petitions and running for school board, there's something concrete that every American parent, almost every American parent, I know one guy because of a court order can't, but almost every American parent can take action right now that'll be more effective than pretty much anything else you could do for the cause of freedom. And that is get your children out, right? There's a lot of options out there now. There's homeschooling, there's good private schools, there's great Christian schools, Jewish schools, all kinds of great alternatives out there that don't involve government. And I think we need to go back in time and realize we made a huge mistake. When we let the government take over education, starting in the mid 1800s and really coming to full fruition in the early 1900s, that was a mistake of epic proportions. We never should have done that. There's certain things that, government, we can tolerate, right? Punishing murderers. Okay, I'll accept a role for government there. But when it comes to the education, the training, and the formation of the next generation, we need to draw a line and say, you have overstepped your bounds. That is not an appropriate place for government to be involved in. And, parents need to take back control. So that's my goal. We want to get millions of kids out of the public school system into the sanctuary, the safety of homeschools, Christian schools, private schools of all kinds, so that we can really raise up another generation of freedom-loving Americans who will be ready and able to defend our freedoms, to defend our free institutions, so that we can pass those on to the next generation.
Well, Alex, I sure appreciate what you're doing. As funny as you were saying it, I was imagining how life would have turned out if I had gone to your school rather than my public school Rothschild's textbooks and all the other nonsense. So I am really grateful there are folks out there like you that are doing what you're doing. And perhaps just in wrapping up, you can let them know how to find you, the New American Magazine website, and also anything you're doing with the homeschooling, so folks who want more information can start learning about that.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Chris, for having me on. I appreciate what you do, and I appreciate very much the opportunity to come talk about these things. If people want to read, my articles, most of them appear at thenewamerican.com. If you're interested in that special report we did, Rescuing Our Children, you can get that. Go to thenewamerican.com/rescuing our children. You can get it as a PDF, or we can ship you the physical copy. Our goal is to get 1 million copies of that out. We're now on the 7th printing. So if you read it and you say, oh my goodness, all these other political battles we're fighting, all these economic battles, they all depend on this education issue, go back and order 100 and distribute them. That's thenewamerican.com/rescuing our children. I also teach at an online freedom school. It's called the Freedom Project Academy, and that's at fpeusa.org. It's a really cost-effective alternative for a lot of parents out there if you want to check that out. And then I'm on social media. It's Alex Newman _JOU on Twitter. And then on Facebook, it's Alex J. Newman 86. And thanks again for having me, Chris. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Alex. I did read that document you just cited, and it's really maybe the next time someone's feeling down about Trump tweeted this or did that, be a good thing to read, where you see, wow, what's actually possible if we adopted this approach. So we'll have all those links below. Alex, thank you again so much for joining me. We'll have to make sure we do this sooner next time. We want to wish you and your family a happy holiday season, and just grateful for what you're doing out there. It is important, and I look forward to catching up again soon.
Thank you so much, Chris. Really appreciate it.